study session for January 19th. And due to the governor's stay-at-home, stay-at-safe order, we are conducting this meeting via Zoom. And the link to this meeting, as well as call-in numbers, have been published on our website and are published on the agenda this evening, so members of the public can join us. And I see a few members of the public, so thank you for joining us this evening. So the first item on our agenda this evening is the Impact Fee Ordinance and the Traffic Impact Fee Adjustment. And we have our land use
to do that right after the Pledge of Allegiance.
I want to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So we've added that in bold red writing on so Janine needs to help me with that. I have my flag too. So please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. How could I forget the pledge the day before Inauguration Day? Shame on me. So we have the pleasure of having Jennifer Robertson, our land use attorney, joining us this evening, and her and Mr. Bond are going to tackle our first two business items, which is the first of which is the Impact Fee Ordinance and Traffic Impact Fee Adjustment. So Mr. Bond, take it away.
Yes, good evening, members of council. The first two items on the agenda tonight are related, and while they are totally separate issues, the Impact Fee Ordinance has been held up for some time while we have tried to finalize the McCormick Communities Development Agreement for Transportation. And so I wanted to point out before I begin that both of these items were originally scheduled to come to work study tonight and were expected to go to council for consideration on the 26th. However, we had a noticing deadline issue on one of our public notices, and so we've had to delay these until February 9th. And I think there's some incorrect references in the staff reports for both items. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. The Impact Fee Ordinance that is on the agenda tonight, we have been working on since late 2019. And we had hoped to be done much sooner than we are, but I think it was worth the wait because we have ironed out a lot of the challenges with the McCormick Communities Development Agreement that had us administering a two-tier impact fee system in the city, where we had two separate impact fee funds and different project lists depending on where you were in the city. So the ordinance that is before you tonight is the first update to the Impact Fee Ordinance since its inception in 2015. And in 2015, the city adopted traffic impact fees for the first time in its history, but we had always had park and school impact fees, which are not proposing to change as a result of tonight's action. So back in 2015, when we adopted our Impact Fee Ordinance, we initially did a traffic impact fee study that came back with an impact fee recommendation of about $4,000 per peak PM trip. And because we were still just coming out of the recession and we were comparing ourselves to what development costs were in surrounding jurisdictions, there was a desire to try to lower that fee to be more in line with our neighbors. And so some of the projects that were the basis of that study were removed from the study to lower the total traffic improvement program cost such that the impact fees would also be lower. And so here we are 5 years later, and the costs of projects have gone up, and there are several projects which are not eligible for impact fee expenditures at this time because they're not part of our impact fee study. So we employed TSI, who's been our traffic consultant for a number of years now, to develop a new traffic impact fee study. And we added a lot of those projects back into the fee calculation that had been removed in 2015. And that includes projects like Fireweed, Sydney Avenue south of Tremont, Melcher on the west side of Port Orchard Boulevard. There's several areas of the city where we have very substandard roads that do not have capacity to support development. And so the fee program has been expanded to support those projects. In addition, the Tremont project actually came in quite a bit above our estimates from 2015. And there were a number of reasons that you probably recall as we went through the 2-year process of building that road. But that project cost ended up at $24 million when we had originally estimated $17.5 million in our last traffic impact fee study. Finally, the Bethel Sedgwick corridor study was developed. And so in 2015, we had really rough estimates for project cost for Bethel. And I think the total amount was about $35 million, if I remember right. And after going through the exercise and identifying a phasing plan and figuring out right-of-way needs and other constraints on that project, we came back with a study that was significantly more expensive for all 5 phases of that development. And so all of those factors, adding projects and getting updated numbers on various projects, has led to a higher proposed impact fee of $4,943 per peak PM trip. And just to jog your memory back to past work study sessions, we did go through kind of a high, medium, and low exercise where we looked at different iterations of the traffic impact fee calculation, where we had a larger number and a fewer number of projects on that list. And the direction from council at that time was that we did want to go forward with all of the projects that we had identified in our comprehensive plan, and try to ensure that development is paying for its share of those projects going forward. So tonight, there's an ordinance before you that is, it's pretty near final draft unless there are questions or concerns or requested revisions. And I want to walk you through a few sections, but before we do, does anybody have any questions about the study that is attached to your packet tonight?
Councilmember Diener? You need to unmute yourself, though. Do you wish to speak to Councilmember Diener? There you go.
Yes, sometimes my space bar works and sometimes it does not. Could you explain how the grants calculations were determined? I see that there's a lot of discussion about grant supports for projects, but I'm just curious, how do we arrive at that number?
So for the entire improvement program, the city is assuming that we're going to get about 50% grant funding for projects, and included in grants is also direct contributions from developers. And so there's at least one project in Bremerton that is paid into city projects, which isn't part of our impact fee program. It was a SEPA-based mitigation fee, but generally grants and other contributions are assumed to be about 50% of project costs. And if you look at Tremont, I think we were, including the original design money, we were a little above 50% in terms of the grant funding that was received for that project. And Noah could probably fill you in on what the amount was that we bonded for that project. But I think we were closer to 60% grant funding on that. And so I think that's a pretty safe assumption for projects going forward. You can of course tweak that if you think that you're going to do better or do worse in your study, but that's kind of the recommendation from the traffic consultant.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, so moving on to the ordinance itself, it's a relatively short ordinance once you exclude the exhibits. There are 3 sections I wanted to walk you through. Section 2, this section is being amended.
Nick, can you share your screen?
Sure. You're going to have to enable me though, or Janine will have to enable me.
Yep, you're co-host now, Nick.
All right, let me just make sure I'm picking the correct screen. All right, are you looking at section 1, 2, and 3?
Yep.
All right, so in section 2, this is an existing section of code that when we initially adopted the impact fee ordinance, we had just used verbiage that referred to the appendices attached to the ordinance adopting this chapter. However, now that we're going through the process of amending these fees, we are changing this verbiage so that the impact fees can be revised at any time that the city council deems just and appropriate, and that the impact fee schedules would be adopted by ordinance of the city council. So it's not referring to a specific ordinance, but just that when we change fees, they will be adopted by ordinance. And just as an aside, the the parks plan is nearing completion. And as part of that effort, we're going to have a parks impact fee study that will potentially justify a revision in the parks impact fee. And so if in May or June of this year, we decide to take that issue up, we would just pass an ordinance repealing the old park study and adopting a new one, and it wouldn't be codified. It just it would be a non-codified ordinance. The other section that Ms. Robertson recommended that we add was clearly designating that our 6-year, 20-year transportation improvement program, which is adopted in reference in our comprehensive plan, is the capital facility plan for the purposes of identifying transportation improvements subject to impact fees. And so this is a new, very brief section that just helps show how this program complies with state law. And then finally, the section 4 is the adoption of the traffic impact fee schedule, which was what was attached. That's the report from TSI that's attached to the ordinance. And then section 5 just refers back to those previously adopted schedules, which were exhibits B and C in the old 2015 ordinance, and which are continuing forward unchanged. So it's the ordinance itself is relatively simple. The traffic impact fee study is obviously a complex piece of work that we spent about 1.5 years refining, and I think it reflects the council's intent as we have previously discussed at Transportation Committee and in previous work study meetings. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those. And Jennifer, if there's anything I missed, please feel free to chime in.
Questions for Mr. Bond or Ms. Robertson?
Well, it was in the, thank you, Nick. It was in the council agenda packet, but just so that you know, the old impact fees used to have a separate set aside for McCormick. Because we have the next item on the agenda with the development agreement, that will streamline so that citywide impact fees, which is the amount in this new proposal, would be applicable both in McCormick and outside McCormick. So it's just one impact fee citywide. So I just wanted to point that out.
Councilmember Ashby?
I have something that's really not a big deal, but on the schedule, on table 1, the description of some of our project names, I don't think are clear. And I was wondering if we could have those project names a little more descriptive. And I will point to like 2.01, where it says Sydney North widening. I don't know, north of what? North of Bay Street? Or north of Tremont? I'd say, can we have something just a little more descriptive in there?
Yes, and perhaps we just need to attach the tip to the packet, because the project numbering corresponds to the tip, and then the tip includes more detailed descriptions of each of these projects. So
Okay.
I think that's probably the information that you're looking for.
Okay, it probably is, because I was just curious. And then, and again, this is just curiosity on my part, but on page 3, it says impact fee calculation, and it's under local funding responsibilities. And this is part of Scott's question too, but it says cost sharing agreements with Washington State Department of Transportation and Kitsap County are anticipated to reduce some of the city's project costs. I didn't know that we got money from Kitsap County.
That is a fair point. I think that there is always room to enter into agreements for cost sharing on improvements. And if we, Paulsbo has their joint planning agreement with the county. I think there's a different term that they use for the agreement, but it's similar to what Gig Harbor has with Pierce County, which they call a joint planning agreement. And I think that, we've discussed previously the possibility of having some sort of joint agreement for getting projects in the UGA to help pay for projects like Bethel.
Right.
So
Right.
this references something along those lines, but you're right, we don't have that in place today.
Okay. That was, And my other takeaway, my other aha moment that I'm sure Mr. Clausen will agree with me is the unfunded commitment of about $1.5 million a year we're going to have to come up with, John.
Cookies and pies.
Yeah.
Sell a lot of them. Councilmember Diener. And then
Would this be a good time to talk about tying fees to the CPI?
Yes, and I believe, my memory is failing me right now, but I believe that we did include the CPI adjustment in this ordinance. Is that correct, Jennifer?
I believe it was part of the schedule. It should have been part of the schedule, where there's an automatic adjustment.
I remember we talked about it at length. It's just been so long in the creation of these documents.
Let me say this, we will make sure that when this comes to you for final, that is in there. If it's not already, it should be. I've drafted this ordinance. It's been a while now since we first put it together. So I believe it's in there.
Yeah, it's section
okay.
5 of the traffic impact fee schedule.
So it is in there.
Section 5.
Yeah, it's the very last subheading of section 5 on page 8.
Yeah, that's where it's going.
Okay.
So it will
All right,
automatically.
thank you.
So it will automatically go up every year on March 1st by CPI, and until such times as the council actually changes the impact fee. But otherwise, it will automatically escalate with inflation annually.
Okay, thank you. I was looking for it and I didn't see it, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
But that was not in the ordinance. That was in the report we got from TSI. Does it need to be in the ordinance also, Jennifer?
That was my.
Yeah, we can put a specific provision in there, but it is in the impact fee ordinance to the extent that we adopted it as a fee schedule. So the impact fee schedule was adopted by reference, and then these are not codified, which is section 4, that they are adopting a new transportation impact fee as exhibit A. I mean, if it's the council's pleasure, we can put a section in the chapter that says, that all impact fees are subject to CPIU, and put that provision in. That's perfectly acceptable.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay,
I do too. I agree.
we will make it so.
You still have a question, Councilmember Rosapepe, or was that it?
No, I was going to make the comment that where it was located, but concur about putting it into the ordinance.
I will say one of the reasons it's not in the ordinance is because the school impact fee, the CPI doesn't apply to the school impact fee, and the parks impact fee, it probably should apply to, but it won't apply to it until we have an updated park impact fee study. So if we're going to put it in the code, it needs to say that the transportation impact fee will adjust by CPI, not that all of the fees will adjust by CPI.
Okay. Seeing heads nod. All right. Any other questions on this matter? Are we ready to move on to item number 2?
Just a quick question. When would this take effect?
First meeting in February is our goal.
Well, it'll be passed at the,
I'm sorry. 5 days after publication, if you adopt it on February 9th. So it'd be about the 15th of February or thereabouts.
Not 90 days down the road, et cetera.
No, it can take effect immediately per the usual ordinance 5 days after publication.
Thank you.
one final question on this, and there is no requirement for a public hearing on this ordinance. Is it the council's desire to advertise and hold a public hearing at that meeting on the 9th on this topic?
I'm in support of that.
Yeah, I certainly would like to see notice to the public and an opportunity for them to comment. Whether we have to follow the strict guidelines of a public hearing, I'm not sure of. I mean, there's sufficient advance notice that you have to comply with for a public hearing, which I'm not sure we will have that amount of time. Being that today is what, the 19th?
Oh, we have enough time. We need 14 days, and we only have a a one-day wait on getting it to the paper.
Then I would be for it as well, personally.
I concur.
So we'll conduct, we'll have it as a hearing then.
Hey, Nick, I know that occasionally these things are taken on the road to KBA, for example. Has that been done in this instance?
It has not. I can send them a copy of the proposal and let them know that it's going forward to the city council.
Yeah, and I think by notifying them of the hearing, that too will give them an opportunity to comment.
All right.
Okay. Ready to move on to number 2.
All right, so the second item on the agenda tonight is the McCormick Communities Development Agreement for Transportation. And this is another project that I feel like we've been working on for over a year now. And I am pleased to present an agreement that we have managed to reach agreement between 3 parties, and that is the McCormick Land Company, formerly Gem 1. Doug Scrobut is the representative of that entity. And then McCormick Communities, who is the current developer at McCormick Woods West and North, and then the city. And so before we get into the contents of the new agreement, I want to remind everyone of what was in the old agreement. And so in 2005, Kitsap County entered into a development agreement with Gem 1, who was the developer at that time for transportation. And then in 2009 or 2010, I don't remember the exact date of annexation, the city annexed this area and assumed the county's position in that old agreement. And that was, that's been challenging for a number of reasons. And one of them we just discussed on the previous item, which was that we had to administer 2 separate traffic impact fee areas, one that was contractually based on this 2005 county agreement and one that was applied in other areas of the city. The existing agreement includes a reimbursement for that gets paid to McCormick Land Company for projects that they built around 10 or 12 years ago. That's the Glenwood Connector Road, as well as some Figley Road, Old Clifton Road intersection channelization improvements. And so the finance department is currently administering a complex reimbursement program under the old county agreement. Generally speaking, the old agreement is very cumbersome. It has also, it's reserved actually more capacity than the current owner of McCormick Communities intends to develop at McCormick Woods in terms of our transportation system. I think the current agreement, they still have reservations for about 4,500 units of housing, and they don't intend to build that many units of housing or equivalent commercial units. And so that's potentially a problem, because that means that we've reserved capacity that isn't available to other developers who might develop in other parts of the city. And finally, the city of Port Orchard didn't annex all of the transportation projects that are envisioned in the existing agreement. I think we got about 6 or 7 out of 10 of those projects, but some of the projects still remain in the county, and there's no agreement with the county for how to fully satisfy all the terms of the existing agreement. And finally, the projects that are in the existing agreement are inconsistent with what is currently in our transportation plan for the city. For instance, Old Clifton Road is envisioned as a 4-lane road with traffic signals rather than a 2-lane road with roundabouts and non-motorized improvements. So there was a strong desire from the developer and from the city to update this to streamline our impact fee program, but also to really focus in on the projects that our modeling shows are actually needed, and to try to get those built as efficiently as possible. So the new agreement, as I mentioned, is a 3-way agreement between McCormick Land Company, McCormick Communities, and the city. It does reserve traffic concurrency for the developer, but it's at a scaled down level that is consistent with their current entitlements, as well as the McCormick North, kind of McCormick Urban Village planning area, which envisions some commercial development. There's an amount of transportation capacity that is reserved for that area, which will be part of a future entitlement. There is also a clear authorization for the city to administer one citywide impact fee, not that doesn't require us to spend money from certain pots in different geographic portions of the city. The agreement is going to provide us with flexibility for the approximately $770,000 that we have in the bank that is currently restricted to a list of a few projects in the McCormick Woods area, and which are, number one, the project descriptions, as I mentioned, are inconsistent with our traffic plan, but we also don't have the other pieces of funding that are needed to complete some of those projects. So this agreement basically says that we can put that money towards the Anderson Hill Roundabout, we can put it to Bethel, and we can use it kind of in any amount that we see fit, consistent with our current impact fee program and transportation plan. The other thing it does is the term of this new agreement is 20 years. So that gives them 20 years to use their reserved capacity, and does include a possibility for some extensions. Except that McCormick Land Company's reimbursement, which remains intact, it does not have an expiration. It basically stays in effect until they're paid back in full, which actually should take less than 20 years at their current rate of development, or at least their planned rate of development for the next few years. I did the math probably a month or two ago, and I think that they needed to get to about 60 or 70% build out before McCormick Land Company was made whole. Finally, the agreement, as I mentioned, it ensures that Doug Scrobat and McCormick Land Company are made whole. There's no financial impact to them, but it does provide that the developer is actually going to build two of the projects that were in the previous agreement, and those are the intersection improvements at Campus Parkway and Old Clifton Road, and at McCormick Woods Drive and Old Clifton Road. So there is a schedule in the proposed agreement that says that they will complete both of those projects, I think by 2024, but that they're going to receive an impact fee credit. And I think it's $1,000 discount per lot until the credit is exhausted. So they're actually going to build two projects for the city, but they're going to get a reduced impact fee in that area until they exhaust their credit. One other big change is the old agreement. If you, the recorded copy of that agreement was in the packet, and some of the maps that were in there really weren't clear. They looked like they had been copied on a 1998 copy machine a couple of times, and the resolution was greatly reduced. And so the exhibits that are included in the new agreement are quite clear. We list specific parcel numbers that are covered by the agreement, and also clearly identify which areas are eligible for impact fee credit. So before I actually get into the text of the agreement, I'm going to kind of walk you through section by section. Are there any initial questions on what has been put forward today? And Jennifer, if there's anything that you want to add to this, please feel free to do so.
Thanks. I would just add about the term. The term of the 2005 agreement was 20 years after the last project was done, so it's kind of a who knows how long it might last, for 50 or 100 years. That was one of the big issues with the 2005 agreement. This agreement, as Nick said, it's a 20-year timeline. The reason that that's good is it gives the developer incentive if they want to get all of their the investment that they put into these two projects back in terms of credit. They need to keep building. And because at the end of 20 years, if they are not fully compensated by credits, unless we do an extension, they will only get what, the credits that they've gotten to the time of expiration. So it really gives an incentive for them to keep going and for the development to come to fruition. So I think that's a pretty big benefit of the new agreement.
Question. Go ahead, Mr. Kachardi.
A question for the attorney, and I don't know if section 32 is the right paragraph for this, but is there any way to put a limit on city's liability, maybe more specific to what's listed in here for, is there an opportunity to quantify, what the sum of these potential credits are, and to call out a limit within this development agreement to protect the city?
Okay, so I was trying to get to set 32, which I haven't, but I know what you're asking. So if they, for example, decided they wanted to lay gold brick as part of the roundabout, we would have to give them credits kind of thing. Is there an upper limit? There is if that's the question, there is an upper limit. The upper limit is the engineer's estimate or actual costs, whichever is less. And the engineer's estimate will go up by CPI. So the
And for-
engineer estimate is the amount that's in our TIP plan, which is adopted as part of the impact fee program. That
And what
answer your
about,
question, Councilmember?
yeah, no, that's great. What about any additional liability for breaches or anything like that? Could a limit be called out?
I'm not really understanding your question. They will be having bonds to build it. They have to build it to city standards, and there will be a maintenance bond for a few years after the fact. It's going to be a public roadway though. So after the project is complete, everything will be transitioned to the city with a maintenance bond in place for a few years.
Yeah, I guess I was just calling out the potential liability for the city based on any damages that we may have created could have a maximum limit of up to a value of kind of what you were explaining before. Maybe it's in here.
There is, we do have in here, let me find it. There was an indemnification and liability release. Here we go. On section 32, any breach of the agreement, which gives right to damages, that it doesn't give right to damages, only to damages under contract law. And then there's a third party legal challenge, which is section 33. In the event anyone else brings an action against it, that the developer will hold us harmless and we can tender our defense to them.
Okay.
So is that?
Yeah, no, you answered my question. I just wanted to make sure that there's, just kind of some limitations on liability for things that may be unforeseen into the future.
Yeah, we're always trying to work on that. So does 33 get to what you're asking for?
33 certainly does. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Councilmember Ashby?
Yeah, and I want to preface what I'm going to say is that I'm not opposed to this, but we have this $1,000 credit that we're talking about. And as I understand it, that's just for this development agreement. Now, are we putting ourselves in the same position with this that we did in the original agreement? In that this is not going to be citywide. This $1,000 credit is just going to be for the development agreement with McCormick Communities.
That's correct. So the 2005 agreement actually required the city to collect impact fees and to write checks to the developer, which we're continuing to do with McCormick Land Company, which is the successor of Gem 1. This would not have the city writing checks to the developer. It just gives them a credit that they can, for the parcels that are identified in the exhibits. The thing to keep in mind is under state law, when a developer builds an impact fee, a project that's listed on the capital facilities plan, they are entitled to get a credit under state law. So, we could have other developers asking us for credits if they're building an intersection near their development, et cetera, that would be an impact fee project. So this recognizes that, and it's very consistent with state law as well as the city's code.
And I would add to that Noah and I spent a great deal of time building spreadsheets and looking at different scenarios for how this credit would be structured. And so currently at McCormick Woods, they're based on the contract plus the citywide, a portion of the citywide fee, I think they're paying about $2,700 per house. And so that's going to increase to $4,900 per house. But they are getting $1,000 reduction. So it is moving the needle in terms of the city's ability to pay for the projects that are in our plan. But certainly the increase to other areas of the city is going to be more valuable in terms of completing projects like Bethel or some of the projects that have a huge chunk of money from or a huge chunk of funding from impact fees. So we looked at a couple of different models. Initially, we were talking about a percentage. So whatever our impact fee was, they wanted a 50% credit based on our impact fee at the time. And that really didn't make sense for the city, but we figured that a flat fee of $1,000 was advantageous enough for the city to move forward.
Other questions? Okay. Going to be comfortable seeing this on the agenda next week?
In February 9th.
Excuse me, February 9th with the other document.
So I was going to walk through a couple of sections of the agreement. I'll share my screen again, except that I don't have permission anymore. All right. So you should be looking at sections 1, 2, and 3. Is that right? All right, thank you. So real quickly, just to touch on a couple of these sections, I mentioned it was a 3-party agreement. Section 5 identifies the parties. We talked about the term of the agreement as being 20 years, except that the McCormick Land Company reimbursement does not expire until full reimbursement has been received. Section 8 addresses the full repeal of the 2005 transportation agreement. Section 9 deals with concurrency. And as I mentioned before, I think they had reserved around 4,500 trips, and that has been reduced to 3,800 in total. And we inserted this table to help clarify where those trips were reserved. And I think that is helpful, number one, because when you convert, residential trips are pretty close to 1-for-1 in the ITE manual, but commercial trips vary greatly depending on the use that is proposed, whether it's a coffee shop at a restaurant or an insurance sales office. And so we wanted to make sure that we were reserving the non-residential trips in a peak PM trip quantity. And then we wanted, for residential, we added lot or unit counts to show how many total units could be built, because the ITE manual gets updated periodically, and occasionally the trip generation for a particular use may change. And so we wanted to make sure that the reservation corresponded to a number of units, not just a number of trips, in the event that we were reserving more capacity than was needed for this project. Moving on to section 10, this is the project schedule for the 2 roundabouts that are going to be built by the developer. And it is the developer's intent. We are working on scheduling a pre-construction meeting for the Campus Parkway roundabout, which is going to be started this spring. And then the Old Clifton McCormick Woods Drive intersection. There's a couple of steps that are listed here. They must commence construction by June 2021. But this also is contingent on the city acquiring any right-of-way that might be needed. And so the north side of that intersection is controlled by one of the HOAs for the developments on the north side of Old Clifton Road. And so this requires that all of us remember, especially Mark, to initiate right-of-way acquisition conversations with those parties so that this project can be delivered on time. Otherwise, it may not get delivered on schedule. Section 11 just talks about project standards and kind of the steps involved in completing these projects, whether it's the bonding requirements, both passing inspection, getting plans approved, etc. Section 12, I believe, addresses Councilmember Ashby's concern about the maximum project cost. And so it talks about the engineer's estimate contained in the traffic impact fee calculation, which if you scrolled back up to the study from TSI, there is a total project cost associated with these intersections. And it was either 2 or 2.5 million. I can't remember off the top of my head. And so each project would be limited to $2.5 million credit. However, if the actual construction cost is less than that, that credit is capped by the certified engineer cost. But there is a CPI adjustment on that. So those numbers are likely to increase slightly between now and when those projects are completed, at least for the McCormick Woods Drive intersection. The next section that I wanted to talk about was section 13. This really just clarifies that the parties are agreeing that that it's best for there to be one citywide impact fee, and that they're sort of consenting to that approach to mitigating this project's transportation impact citywide. Section 14 on impact fee credits. This is what really outlines the $1,000 per unit credit, and the fact that that credit will increase with the traffic impact fees are going to increase per the CPI, and then that credit amount will also increase by the CPI annually. So they'll move in lockstep with one another. Finally, section 15, this is the one that McCormick Land Company was really concerned about. And we did, after we kind of finished the overall framework, we worked directly with Mr. Scrobutt on the terms, and we massaged this a little bit, and have now addressed all of his concerns. And so this ensures that he gets made whole for that Glenwood Connector Road project and the Figley Road project that I mentioned. Finally, one of the carryovers from the 2005 agreement was that if the city needs right-of-way that McCormick Communities controls, such as we were deeded a piece of property at the Anderson Hill roundabout intersection, they will continue to provide right-of-way as it is needed for any of the projects that are on our tip. And so that would be potentially an Old Clifton widening project or multimodal pedestrian trail type improvements along Old Clifton. And if we needed some land associated with the future improvements to the Figley Road intersection, they will provide that at no charge to the city. And then just going to scroll down to section 27. The developer is going to be reimbursing the city for its cost of preparing this agreement. And so Jennifer's bills that have been racked up over the last year or so, we will be sending them an invoice as part of the execution of the contract. And I think those are the high points of the document. And so if there are any other questions, please feel free to ask.
Questions for Mr. Bond? Okay. Appears not.
Just congratulations on finally getting this to this point. It's been a long time coming. I know a lot of work's been put into it.
Thank you.
I would agree, and just congratulations in pulling this together. It looks perfectly reasonable to me.
Mr. Krabby
Thank
from
you.
McCormick Communities is with us tonight, and I appreciate the hard work he and his team have put together on this too. I think at one point we were delusional, and we thought we would get one agreement that would conquer sewer, water, and transportation. And you know, more than a year ago we solved sewer, and here we are solving transportation, and we still have some work to do on the water side of the equation. But they've been great partners, and I look forward to solving the next challenge with them. So we'll bring this forward on February 9th, and we'll move on to our next item for business this evening. So, and we have the pleasure of having Chris Hammer with us tonight, our transportation engineer, and he gave a PowerPoint presentation to the Transportation Committee at the end of last year, kind of a Transportation 101. And we thought it would be appropriate to bring that forward to the full council. So Chris, go ahead, and Janine can allow, Janine, you have Chris's slides, or is Chris gonna?
He has them, and he is now co-host. Chris, if you have any issues, just let me know.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So on to transportation. Let's see if I can share the screen here. Everybody looking at the PowerPoint?
Yep. You just
Okay.
need to maximize your screen, or go into the PowerPoint.
Okay. Yeah, so actually I am going to take some of the elements from, as far as the scope of this, the Transportation Committee did ask that I share some of the things, the 101 educational aspects. Also, I'm going to try to address some of the highlights from the committee work last year, and then the work plan. going forward, the city's work plan and transportation for 2021 and 2022. The first order here is we're going to start with the AWC's Transportation 101 video. So now I got to figure out how to share that. Guess I just put that right here.
Almost every trip in Washington.
Everybody see that?
No, you got to click on it.
Okay. I've got to find
You
out.
have to share the screen that has the video on it. So you may have to disconnect and reshare.
Okay. Okay, yeah. You are sharing. New share. There we go.
Chris is a much better engineer than he is a.
Yeah, I'm not used to working with Zoom as much. Okay, and are we now looking at the video?
Maybe.
Oh.
We have a gray box.
Okay.
There you go. Now we're looking at a video.
Almost every trip in Washington begins on a city street. And as Washington's population
Everybody hear that okay?
economy grows,
Yeah.
so does
Yeah.
the transportation network. City streets are more than just a road. Above ground, they're bike lanes, sidewalks, curbs, gutters, lighting, landscaping. But below are sewer, water, stormwater, electric, and cable utilities. And when a street is built over a waterway, it even incorporates a fish passage into the design. Our transportation system is one of the most valuable assets we have. It's no small cost to ensure that it's well built and maintained for today and the future. But our city streets lack a sufficient revenue source. City transportation systems must compete with important priorities like police and fire protection, parks, and other programs and services. What about the gas taxes we pay at the pump? Well, most of that goes to the state to pay for highways. Cities receive only a small portion, and as the population has grown, your city's share hasn't kept up. It takes a while for a pothole to develop on a city street. However, it just doesn't make sense to defer maintenance. And while maintaining our streets may cost a lot, paying for reconstruction down the road costs a whole lot more. All this means that as cities grapple with fund priorities, we need to ensure our transportation systems are not neglected. We can't throw future generations under the bus. We all need to work together to make sure these important assets are well designed, constructed, and maintained.
Okay, and are we looking at the PowerPoint now?
You didn't pick up on that. That was the voice of the Cougars.
No, you'll have to
Your screen. Okay, here we go.
yeah.
And share. And
Yeah, just go into the slideshow, start slideshow.
yeah, that's what we're trying to get now. Okay, that's probably that should be the end of our technical difficulties here. Anyway, I thought that video was pretty good. It just gave everything in kind of a picture's worth 1,000 words about streets to begin with, and then we face the same kind of funding challenges overall, as well as the emphasis on roadway preservation, which is a challenge for all cities, including our cities, and that's been one of the priorities for council this year. So I thought that was a good intro. I'd like to start with our roadway network. This gives the overall hierarchy of streets within the city. You can see the city surrounded, the extent of the city limits are surrounded by gray here. We have our principal arterial, State Highway 16, that bisects the city. Other primary arterials would be Sedgwick 160 to the south and 166 Bay Street turns into Mile Hill Road to the north of the city. Some of the other colors here, you'll find the green are shown collectors such as Tremont and Pottery. I'm sorry, those are secondary arterials, and then onto collectors, which are the purple streets. And the streets that are not colored are all of our local access streets. So this is a good place to start because when we're thinking about the terms of growth, most of the level service issues we face are on our major roadways. And also when we look in terms of roadway preservation, the roads that break down the fastest and need the most immediate attention are the ones with the heaviest amounts of traffic and truck traffic. Some of the planning tools that we have that we use, we have our comprehensive plan that has the transportation chapter that's built on the traffic model, includes all of our forecasting for level of service. We have a pavement management plan that helps us manage our priorities and more effectively, cost effectively manage our restoration of our roadway surfacing. We have an ADA transition plan that helps us. We've got a lot of older sections of town that have deficiencies, and so it helps us plan for that, kind of a risk management tool to show that we are doing things incrementally over time to keep us out of trouble. And likewise with the local agency safety plan, we did the first one this year, and that allows us to look at our collision statistics, and as we develop our capital improvement planning, taking into account safety enhancements. We also have a number of system plans, which are more focused planning around the city. One example of that would be the Bethel Sedgwick corridor study. And then as we update the budget each year, we also update the not necessarily the priorities, but the schedule and the budget with our capital improvement plan. Some of the work from 2020, like I said, we completed the first local agency safety plan. We spent with the committee, we spent quite a bit of time talking about street improvement projects and the priorities around that. We looked at one set of streets, we call the major corridors in the city. We looked at a number of factors that would play into the prioritization of those improvements. The city also has aspirations for improvements in certain centers and neighborhood streets that are also being impacted by growth. So we took some time and looked at those, some of the collectors and local access streets as well, and kind of revisit the TIP, Transportation Improvement Plan. And all that in preparation for the CIP update that was in the middle of the year in June, and the transportation impact fees that you were talking about earlier this evening. We spent quite a bit of time looking at funding opportunities or funding for and priorities and need for asphalt preservation. And we clearly heard that that's a priority for council. And we spent a little bit of time looking at a framework for how we would address our sidewalk needs and ADA stuff in anticipation of our update to our ADA transition plan. Other work was on the line of grant applications. We submitted 6 grant applications this year, and we secured two different grants from the city safety program. So the challenges, we have a lot of growth here in South Kitsap County in the city, a lot of existing deficiencies on our roadway network, as well as ones that show up in our comprehensive planning for level of service issues due to growth, both through roadway segments and intersections as we go forward. So for us, the transportation impact fees, which is great, we have those, they've been in place for some time, and we're doing this update to make sure that it better suits our needs, are going to be really important. Also leveraging with grant opportunities. Right now, over half of the funding for our larger transportation plant projects are coming from grants, and due to our funding constraints, we're going to be very heavily dependent on grant opportunities. On the roadway preservation side, we want to maintain our existing roadways in good condition to keep our repair costs low. So similar to what we saw in the video, and a lot of cities are struggling with this, but if we spend money today and keep our roadway network in better condition, that means we have to spend we spend a lot less today than we do tomorrow if we let things deteriorate further. And then again, something that's kind of unique to this city is we have a lot of older neighborhoods. So along with that, we have some number of sidewalks that need repair, and a lot of our sidewalks we do have are not accessible and need to be upgraded. So I also wanted to share, this is a mind map that we use to facilitate the discussions with the Transportation Committee this year. Kind of a framework for what we looked at that's unique to the city. We start with our budgeting and our transportation improvement plan here in the center. And then above the line, we have the improvements that we want to do to address our level of service needs and the discretionary items that the council is interested in moving forward with. We looked in kind of two different buckets. Again, we looked in terms of our arterial corridors. A lot of those things are level of service driven with the growth we have. And then we also looked at the center and neighborhood streets. Spent a considerable amount of time with that as well. Below the line, we want to build all this on a solid foundation of preservation. We're not going to, if we start doing all these improvement projects and we neglect our streets and sidewalks, pretty soon our citizens are probably not going to understand why we're not giving attention to those things as well. So we spent quite a bit of time with pavement repairs and sidewalk repair and retrofit. But those are the kind of the four buckets, and that feeds into the work plan. So an overview of the work plan for the next 2 years in the area of the improvement projects. We'll continue work on the Bay Street pedestrian pathway. We received a grant for the Bethel and Lincoln intersection project. So we're going to begin, that'll enable us to begin our delivering our Bethel corridor suite of projects that we planned for with the Sydney Bethel corridor study. We have some developer contribution that we can use to further the design on the corridor as well, in anticipation of future grant applications for the Bethel and Salmonberry intersection. And then things are going to start to take place on the Old Clifton corridor. We've got a developer concurrency requirement to put in an intersection improvement that's, I understand, on track to be constructed this year at Old Clifton in the Campus Parkway intersection. And we have traffic impact fees that are unique for the McCormick Woods area that allow us to begin design in anticipation of trying to position us for grant funding for non-motorized improvements on Old Clifton, which are one of our next priorities in our transportation improvement plan. And the other thing that we received a award for some money to do LED upgrades. So that's another thing that we're going to look to do. On the preservation side of the house, we've received additional funding has been budgeted for doing pavement repair. So new for this biennium, we'll be contracting out pavement repair work, and we'll do that on an annual basis. Included in that will be we've had some plans in the hopper for a while for pavement repairs at Lippert, and we'll address that along with the other improvements. And then I wanted to point out that there are some utility projects that are related to transportation as far as preservation of our roadways and sidewalks. And one of the first ones out the gate this year is going to be the Sydney Avenue sewer repair project. And that'll include some intersection pavement preservation as well as some ADA improvements. So the other aspect of roadway preservation is the work we do with our own crews. And this year we're going to step up our game. We're going to purchase some equipment that'll improve our capabilities and efficiencies for asphalt repair, and then also get us seriously into crack sealing, which is going to be really important for us because we have a lot of roads that are in relatively good shape. We want to keep them that way, and crack sealing is going to be very important for that. One of the treatments that's going to be important to maintain our roads in good condition. And there's additional money in the budget as well for the crews, and I'll get into the financials here as we wrap things up. On the planning side, we're not doing as much the next couple of years as we have in the past few years, but we are going to do the ADA transition plan update, and we received funding through the city safety program for street lighting study. And we will continue to focus on grant applications to leverage the impact fees and other funding. So to wrap things up, here we have, you can see that almost 3/4 of the transportation dollars in this biennium are focused on improvement projects. And but over half of that is grant funded. Most of the remaining balance of that is the transportation impact fees. A little over a quarter of the funding will be for pavement preservation. And that includes the additional 825,000 over the 2 years for contracting out work, which is some additional work that we haven't done in the past. We will be doing, as well as 565,000 in the budget for work by our own forces, and then a small amount for planning. One financial aspect that I want to bring up is we will be coming to you on February 9th for presenting a professional services agreements for design for the Bethel and Lincoln intersection. That was the one grant award we received, so we're having to shuffle a little bit in the priorities in the 6-year tip and delay some other work. So more to come on that. So hopefully I kept that to around 10 minutes and open any questions. Mark, if you had anything to add that you think is important that I missed, feel free to chime in.
No, I think that's really good. And the only question I had was, I guess for Nick and Noah, I'm not 100% sure. I thought we were having to update our transportation plan in 2022 to be picked up in the next comp plan update. Or do we not have to do that? I don't see it's in the budget, so that's why I'm asking.
I know that was on the city's to-do list, and we don't have to adopt the new comprehensive plan until June 30th of 2024. So early 2023 is just fine for the transportation plan, but we could also start it in late 2022 if that made more sense in terms of our work plan.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I covered a lot of information. Any questions about any of the slides or work plan, committee work?
We're going to try many new things in the next biennium, and I know staff greatly appreciates the additional funding that council authorized, nearly $1 million towards our residential streets.
Yeah, it's just great to see the emphasis on preservation starting to play out here in this next budget. It'll be fun to see it, and I know the community will appreciate it.
I agree, and that's really, there's a lot of balls in the air, and I want to commend the city for its work with the Transportation Committee and Chris for keeping us lined out and focused during those meetings. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but it looks like we're off to a good start.
Councilmember Clausen?
Yeah, just a comment. I'm not sure if anyone else is aware, and I appreciate this is very, very early in the process, but Chairman Fye of the House Transportation Committee introduced a funding proposal. I don't know if folks have seen it. It seems to be pretty aggressive in his committee's proposal. It's like an 18-cent a gallon increase in the gas tax, 3 cents on diesel. There's a $15 a ton carbon fee. I mean, it's anticipated that if it's approved, it's about 26.7 billion in the it's in a 16-year period, but it's still quite a bit of money. There's going to be funding for Transportation Improvement Board, multimodal, a number of things. So there's a little bit of a silver lining if it gets it through the legislature. I just wanted to mention that there's monies in there for preservation as well. Now, I'm sure the majority of it is going to go towards state highways and roadways, but I'm hopeful that there's going to be some available. So having these projects ready to go is going to be helpful.
John,
I haven't seen that yet. Is there a project list attached to it? Because in his past proposal, our roundabouts at Sedgwick and 16 have been in his packages.
No, this is allocating funding to the various buckets. It's not to a specific project per se. It's things like the fish culverts that the state has to do, but there are funds. There's funds set aside for transit. There's some funds set aside for bike ped grants, safe routes to schools, complete streets, connecting communities. I mean, they're basically, he's proposing to fund a lot of the existing grant buckets that are out there and available. So just that there's a little bit of a light at the end of this tunnel if this gets approved, that there might be some funding available for grant opportunities is all.
John, what it sounds to me like is he's looking at the revenue side, and then he's taking that revenue and he's putting it into a competitive process for the project side. Yeah, and not doing a legislatively directed list of projects.
Yeah, that's the way I'm looking at it as well. That's why I say it's just kind of funding the existing buckets out there, and then we're all going to be competing for whatever funds are in there. But, you know, there's $828 million, for example, that's going into the Transportation Improvement Board. So, Mark, you're probably happy to hear that.
Thanks for sharing that, John.
Yeah, that's in line with what we've been hearing from Secretary Millar, in that Secretary Millar was hoping for opportunities for DOT to manage their entire system that weren't legislatively directed projects. So, so that's obviously one of the solutions that they're looking at.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, in these times that we're in the midst of, you know, we kind of assume that the legislature is going to go into it with, you know, hunker down and try to steal from whatever buckets we can to preserve. And Representative Fye has taken a pretty aggressive approach, or at least his committee. So again, we haven't heard from the Senate side yet, and it hasn't made it through the entire process, but at least that there's some positive things coming out of Olympia, at least in verbiage.
Okay, when you said Representative Fye, I was thinking some Senator Hobbs. So, okay, that's all.
Yeah, this is the House side. This is Chairman Fye's committee that's proposed that. So,
and I did look at the budget. We actually do have $50,000 in 2022 to get started on the transportation element update. We will meet that guideline or time frame.
Other questions for Chris about the transportation plan? That it's kind of just really kind of an overview of what the committee was doing. So
yeah, no, I appreciate the information, Chris. I think that was very good. Obviously, I'm going to be very interested as we go forward for the preservation side of things, just to make sure that we're staying up on our local streets and not letting them get into a crisis position. So thank you.
Welcome.
okay, we're on to our last item, but then I've got a few little minor items that aren't on the agenda, so don't rush off on me. So our last item is sewer and water credit discussion. We had this discussion last week with the Finance Committee, and we were asked to bring this forward to the full council. And I think, Janine, if you could let Noah share his screen, that'd be wonderful. And I just want to, you know, it's important to remember as we start to talk about this that we can't pay developers to build our capital projects directly. And so we haven't found a silver bullet to solve the, you know, us catching up on these projects. But I think what we have found is something that's in Paul's Boat code. They haven't used it in a number of years. And I think this will, I think, get used for a couple of large projects and may sit on, you know, just sit in our code unused for a number of years, because we'll get caught back up and building these projects on our own. And this is the model here is if somebody builds a large project for us, they're going to get credit for the excess capacity that they create in our system. And so we've got some code that Charlie's been working on but really the easiest way to show this is in we've done some scenarios. Maybe if Noah could just jump right to the first one, and I'll let Noah walk through these. And so we've gone from some scenarios where the developers portion of this is about 25% to 50% and to 75%, just to show you how the math works on these. So go ahead, Noah.
Well, and before Noah gets started, let me just say that most cities they tend to lean on latecomers agreements as their model. That's always still available in the city for those developers that want to employ the latecomers agreement model. This just provides another alternative.
Another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mayor. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I think the mayor did a great job introducing kind of where we've come again, and the overall concept that we're looking at is providing a credit for when a developer is providing the city over and above capacity than that they need. And so that's the underlying theme here, is that when we look at these projects, the developers obviously have a stake in these facilities. They have a need of a certain amount of connections. And it's those connections that they don't need, or the excess capacity, is where we've kind of honed in on the availability of credit to be provided. So in this example, I'm going to highlight and point to the yellow highlights here. We have a project that cost $2.5 million. Now down below here, our city engineer has determined with the developer that connections, the total connections for this facility, for this infrastructure project, are 1,000. And of that 1,000, the developer needs 250 for their project. And so what that means is that there are 70 additional connections that are over and above the developer's needs. And we're calling that the excess capacity. And so when we look at the prorated percentage of the developer's connections at compared to the overall facility, we get to a responsibility that 25% of the connections is really for the developer. And then so we kind of backed into how much of the project cost is attributable to the developer's need versus the future capacity. And that's where you see up above where we've identified 625,000 of the $2.5 million is attributable to the developer's connections need, while the remainder is for future connections. The other piece of the equation that we're looking at is, so first we have to determine how much of this project is really for the developer. And the other piece is how much revenue does the city anticipate will be available that they could actually provide a credit for. And so then we look at our capital facility charge, and we're only looking at the general facility charge here of $8,525. And we do the math to multiply it by the number of potential connections to arrive at our proportions for the developer as well as excess capacity. So we just do the math to get us down to the bottom line, which is the credit concept we're exploring is providing a developer the credit of the lesser of the two. That would be that the developer is eligible for a total credit value of whatever the lesser value is, the certified excess capacity, the cost piece, or the total developer fee revenue to be paid. So in this particular example, again, we are saying this $1.875 million here is project costs, and those are project costs for excess capacity. So those are costs unrelated to the developer's particular need. And then again, we have the fee revenue that would be collected by the city for the developer's portion of his project. And we have identified that the lesser of the two is actually the project cost component. So the developer would be eligible for up to $1.87 million of credit against their fee connections. So I'm gonna give a second to pause there and allow council and maybe even finance committee to interject and ask questions, because I think it's important to understand the fundamentals before we move on to the inverse of this relationship.
Yeah, Noah, maybe just highlight kind of at the end of our finance committee meeting, we were trying to look at all of these different scenarios just to make sure that the, I guess, the cash flow perspective, that the city isn't at risk for negative cash flow, and all the scenarios we determined that there wasn't. But maybe walk them through in this scenario what that developer would actually pay versus what they would actually be rebated because of the the upfront costs plus their connection fees, less that 1875 there. The developer, but my math serves me right, they're coming out of pocket about 275 million with that 1.8 million dollar credit, which is why the city remains in a positive position to be able to cash flow these improvements.
Well, and the beauty of this too is the developers building this for us, taking this off at our capital improvement plan. They've now built us an asset that can serve 1,000 units, and their need is only 250 units in this particular scenario. We've got another scenario that's a 50-50 split, and I think that the credits are larger because of the excess capacity they're creating on where they're using a smaller portion of the facility. So if you want to maybe jump to some of the other scenarios, and then Sean asked me, and I'll address this at the end for anomalies, and of course we found one. I told you last week, no, we haven't found any, and then we started running through some real life scenarios. We found one.
Yeah. So before I jump to the next scenario, this is the result, right? So looking at what the developer would pay in connection fee revenue based on our general facility charge, they would pay $2.1 million. But under this scenario, they'd be available for a credit of 1.875 million. So they would not pay 1.875 million, which means that the city would actually net $256,000 back into our enterprise utility.
Right.
Again, what's important is that this capital facility charge is not solely for this facility, right? As we built the capital facility charge, it encompasses our entire sewer plan as well as the buy-in of our current infrastructure.
Yep, exactly.
That was the point that I was going to make sure the other council members understood is the amount we're collecting in those fees represents the entire capital facilities list of projects. That was an important piece for me. And as we talk about this, I think in my mind, and part of it became clearer to me when Nick was talking about the old agreement with McCormick, in that when someone is going to do one of these projects, we're going to have to be very careful in the boundary of where that is. It's going to have to be very defined what boundary, what land it's serving. And then the other is to come up with the actual connections for that area. Because most of the time, this is going to be undeveloped land, and the developer is going to be building a project that meets their needs, but will not be for all of the land within that boundary. And we just heard Noah say that when that transportation original agreement was made, they were allowing for like 4,500 trips. And that's what everything was based on. And now that number's been reduced significantly. So the two elements to me that are real critical is the boundary and a very good idea of the ERUs we're going to have.
So Beck, it's important to note, these are projects that are in our capital facility plan that are to build for the benefit of that entire undeveloped area, not just so. And that's why we're compensating them for the excess capacity. In this example,
what I'm saying is we need to be pretty sure when we're doing figuring out what credit there is available to them, is to have a pretty concrete idea of what the end use capacity is.
Yes, and that's why these
Yeah.
projects, we're giving you hypotheticals.
Right, no, I
When-
understand.
When we do the code, it's the actual projects and the in our capital facilities plan and the actual connections, the developer, they won't be round numbers like this.
I think that's the important part, is when we do the calculation of total connections that this new improvement is going to provide for, that kind of sets the boundaries per se. There's only so many more connections that this facility can handle.
Yeah, and they're these are what in the real world, and what we'll be applying are the projects that are in our capital facilities plan. We've defined what the build out of those areas are. And so this is this the second, here we go. No, this, we probably shouldn't dive. I mean, this is just an example of a 50-50 split, and to show, and jumping to the bottom line. So in this scenario, half of the infrastructure benefited the developer, and the other half was excess capacity. And you can see that the developer would pay us $4.2 million in connection charges and receive a credit of $1.2 million. So the credit isn't nearly as big because half of this facility was solely for their benefit, and but the project in the whole, the other half was for the city's benefit or future development. And in our last scenario, the project was 75% for the developer's benefit and only 25% for excess capacity. And you can see where that credit diminishes significantly. We received almost $6.4 million in connection charges, and the developer only gets $625,000 in credits. So then last week we ran through all of these scenarios, and Councilmember Cacciardi says, well, have you found any anomalies yet? And then I said, no, we haven't, and we've been playing with it. So then Nick sat down with the developer and applied a real world scenario. It still works, but where it gets complicated is finance ERUs aren't the same as engineering ERUs in its simplest form. So your finance department, every apartment building and every house is one ERU, okay? But in the engineering world, when you design these facilities, a house in McCormick Woods is one, it's got 3 or 4 bedrooms and a number of bathrooms, and that's one ERU. Well, an apartment building doesn't use as much sewer and water. So when you design those, you'll be over designing the system if you made them one-to-one on the engineering side. An apartment is 0.75 on that side of it. So it's still, you have to trust us. It complicates the math, but it still works. Okay. And so I didn't want to, we spent over an hour, the 3 of us, going through these scenarios, and we're confident the math still works. It just gets a little more complicated because we're only going to give credit, build the facility to the need, and not overbuild it, and then only give credit to the level of what they're utilizing. So it just clear as mud. I hope.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you looked into the anomalies, because there's always those unintended consequences that come out of those things. But I still think, even with what you're suggesting, and I do recognize where that may come into play, to me, and I think the committee as well, looked at this and felt that this seemed to be a fair way to move forward for the developer. And it's a fair way for the city to move forward to get these improvements built, and yet not just throwing it completely onto the developer's back. The city is going to be made whole. We get the benefit of the improvement and the excess capacity, depending upon what percentage. So
yes,
I think it's a worthwhile project or scenarios to go forward with.
Thank you, Councilmember Clausen. And I mentioned this at the beginning. It isn't intended to be a dollar for dollar. We can't pay the developer to build our capital projects.
Right.
And while the developer isn't being whole, we do, as Councilmember Ashby pointed out, the connection charge isn't just for that one facility, it's the buy-in to the overall system. So it isn't dollar for dollar, but it is significantly greater than the credits that we're providing today. And I think it's a meaningful step forward to try to get some of the development community to build some of our capital program for us. Councilmember Rosa Pepe?
So how does this get implemented then?
Next Tuesday night, by you saying aye.
Okay, I was trying to figure out what that really, the flip of the switch is, and maybe that's
well, first, yeah. First, we
have
have to go back and review the code language and make sure that we are capturing the concept. It's a lot easier to talk about the concept and kind of work through the example than to capture that language in code to make sure it's clear and transparent for everyone. So we have to work through the exercise with Charlie and Nick and Mark to make sure that the language is very clear and understandable. And at some point we'll bring an ordinance to say, here's how we would propose we modify the code language to reflect the concept in the example. And an important part of actually executing on this concept is, as Councilmember Ashby has said, is the certification of those ERUs up front, both for what the facility can have as capacity as well as the engineering side. Because once that gets set, you can't change that a year or two later because you've entered into an agreement and that's how the math works. So that is very important.
So we've got some draft code that Charlie's been working on, but as Noah said, they're words, and we need to make sure the words are clear. And then we're going to embed a math example in it so that, it'll be easy to interpret for the guy that creates this now, but 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, when this tool gets picked up again, we don't want to be potentially where we've been in the past, where finance interprets some language one way, DCD a different way, and the engineering department a third way. I mean, it needs to be very clear, and the development community needs to be able to understand it too. So our hope was to bring it. Are we still on track for next week or not? I know there's a lot of moving pieces here. Charlie's smirking.
I think so.
Well, technically it has to be to the city attorney by today and to Brandy by Thursday.
Well, the city attorney created it, so she shouldn't have a problem reviewing it.
Is it going to be though ready for Brandy to put in the packet on Thursday for next week? I think it needs to be pushed one meeting personally.
Okay. Well, we're trying for next week. Yeah. We'll see if we make that goal or not.
Yeah, I kind of agree with our public works director because I don't want to rush into this and miss something in the code. I mean, again, we've talked about this as a water and sewer credit. So I'm presuming that we would take this concept to the water side of the code as well. And I guess I'm looking for council's reaction to that.
Well, I'll chime in. I think this is a good model template for both, and when we get into the water side here this spring, we're going to be able to put real numbers to it when we start looking at that body of work that Katie Isaacson's working on. So yeah, I think making sure that the template's right, the language is right, the examples are right, because this is going to template our next phase of work.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say the same thing. It'll be nice to go ahead and look at all the models on the water side too, just as a check and balance.
But I think the formulas are going to be applicable to either one. It's just the numbers are going to be different between the water side and sewer side. The concept is the same. So
it's too, and it likely won't. This isn't a tool that we're going to be able to utilize in the McCormick area because, as we saw in the examples, this tool works very well for a developer that's building something with a large amount of excess capacity that's benefiting the city, and we're giving them credit for it. When the scenario is the infrastructure is largely or solely for that developer, this isn't the tool. But we've got other tools like latecomers agreements and development agreements and other methods that we can employ.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the anomaly on the McCormick side of things, on the water side, is our relationship currently with the city of Bremerton, already providing water to service. Those aren't going to be new connections. And so we're just going to have to look at it through a little bit different lens.
So that, Mary, you brought up a good point. Then do we have to clarify that about where you say that it would not fit with the McCormick? How do we?
The math just takes care. I mean, in that scenario,
It would not have to be specific in the ordinance then.
Yeah, no, it just, the math just doesn't work when you invert it, and there's very little. We saw that in the 75% example. I mean, they could get the credit. There's a small credit, but it's not as meaningful it is when it's inverted, and there's a large amount of the capacity is excess capacity.
Yeah, and I also clarify, because the whole point is the math does work. Whether it's achieving the goals you want, that's a different question.
Yeah.
But that's why we test the math. The math works. So,
I agree.
Okay.
And nothing comes back to our existing folks that already sewer and water would not come back on.
No, this is building new infrastructure.
Yeah,
and
this is new improvements.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And giving credit on the connection charges. It isn't affecting rates. So, okay. Well, I always have a dream, and it's yesterday, but it doesn't sound like I'm going to win on this one. But we have a staff meeting in the morning. We'll figure it out. So hopefully, for sure by February 9th, though. All right, those were all of our business items. I had a couple things I'd like to just confirm. One, we talked about shuffling some of the committee meeting nights, and it got complicated, and staff thought they heard that the finance committee was going to move to the works this third Tuesday of the month, and utilities was going to move to the second Tuesday of the month starting in February. But I didn't think I heard consensus to that. Did the council? Is that what the council thought?
That's what I thought. I thought that that the finance department wanted to meet later, or the third Tuesday.
That was the desire of the finance department. That's correct. But Councilmember Lucarelli, if I remember right, pushed back on that, wanting to make that swap. So I just wanted, so staff was moving forward with that, and I said, wait, time out. This is a council committees. I want to check in with you guys.
Yeah, Rob, I finally remember what was the nexus. It was, as Beck says, so that Noah has more time to get the financials.
Correct. I'm aware of that.
So we had agreed, I thought, that we were going to.
No, you as staff agreed. I don't think the council agreed. That's what I'm checking in on here.
This council member agreed to that and wrote that on her calendar. Now, this council member may have misunderstood, but that's what I thought the agreement was.
Okay.
That's pretty much what I have in my calendar now as well.
Okay.
I'm flexible.
Other utility committee members, or does that second Tuesday work for Councilmember Lucarelli?
It'll have to.
Okay. All right. And who's the third? John. Well, John's got both meetings, so he doesn't care.
Yeah, I've got it both in my calendar. So
okay. I just wanted to make sure everybody was on board. And thank you for being accommodating, Cindy. And then my next one is, we signed that letter of intent, and I reached out to the public facilities. So the next step in this process, and I've got Public Works procuring an appraisal. The appraisal looks like it will cost $4,500 on the Kitsap Bank property, and it takes 6 weeks. It is a reimbursable expense, okay, with the Public Facilities District. But remember, our real estate acquisition isn't till after design. Now, I talked to Mike Walton today, and he told me, well, you can take it out of your phase 2 money, but that's our design dollars, and those are all programmed out. So we could get reimbursed for it now, but we'll get caught short at the end of the design period by that same $4,500. I want to bring a contract forward to keep this process moving, but I think we should probably, it's probably cleaner for us to just pay for the appraisal ourselves. Councilmember Clausen?
If we pay for it ourselves, which I'm not opposed to, we could use that towards our local match, could we not?
Absolutely.
So I would be fine with, it's $4,500. It's not, I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's not the end of the world.
Okay, I just wanted to, like I said, I could have pursued it a reimbursement, and it is reimbursable, just not in this phase, and we would cut our current phase short. So
We're gonna pay it now or pay it later, and just soon get it off of our worry list.
all right, so maybe
Now
next.
that's only one. I'm only one
Yeah.
7 years, so.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Jay and any other heads nodding, and
Yeah.
I
was gonna say, I like it because I think we need to know that number as we enter this 30% feasibility. That plays a big role in it. And so we need to go get that number now and not get it 6 months from now.
I agree.
Yeah, it's a number we need to know. You're right.
Yep.
And the bank, until we negotiate that purchase and sale, the bank's not going to move very far with their plans. So that's a motivating piece too for the bank, is for us to come to an agreement on the purchase of their property. So, which is.
Well, and I really like what you're suggesting, and we need to keep this ball rolling until either we get it completed or we find a fatal flaw, one of the two.
Okay, fair enough. And that's all I have. Anything for the good of the order? Councilmember Chang, I see you, and then I'll call on Nick Bond.
Yes, some of you may have heard about a post that I made on social media this weekend, and I wanted to apologize for a post that I made. The post was made on my own personal account, and it was not in any way intended to reflect the council as a whole. It was my own lack of judgment and mine alone. And what it was about was I recently drove by the Blue Goose and was shocked at what I saw. I was both saddened and mystified, and I wondered how long it had been like that. I was actually at a loss for words, and there is a group, it's called Port Orchard Rants. It has some very creative members, and I thought, well, I'll just ask them for some caption suggestions. They could help me figure out, what I was feeling. Now that was a mistake. I did receive several good captions and also a lot of feedback. And for me, it was a very good learning experience to be reminded of how our local businesses are coping. It's interesting that you make a post and you ask for something, and you may get some of the response, like the captions that I was wondering, like, how would you describe this picture? But beyond that, a lot of people were just incensed by what they saw as insensitivity of posting a picture of someone, of the Blue Goose, in case you've seen it. And so I want to apologize for that. I feel that as a whole, the council has actually supported several of the businesses by providing CARES funding for businesses, which have helped some of them, but I know it's never quite enough.
Thank you, Fred. Anything else for the good of the order? Councilor Pichardi, Councilor Ashby?
I would just, and I know that you were going to call on Nick, but Fred, I've had this conversation and we've had it before. It doesn't make any difference whether you post something on your personal or under your personal name. We are city council people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm very careful whenever I'm in public, what I say that may be overheard, because it's a reflection of me as a city council person. I don't have the luxury at this point to make personal comments. And I would like you to keep that in mind, because you're always a council person. You're never not. Rob is always the mayor. He's never not the mayor. And just, we don't get to do public comment because we are council people. So I would just ask you to always keep that in mind whenever you're doing something, particularly on a public platform, because it does represent all of us.
Councilmember Pichardi?
Yeah, Fred, I really appreciate you stepping up tonight and saying the words that you said. Over the last couple of days, I've received a number of phone calls, people expressing a lot of concern. And unfortunately, one of the unintended consequences, there's a certain number of people that think that because one city council member, although you did not identify yourself as a city council member, you were doing it as an individual. Just a lot of people just put us all together, and they felt like this was something coming from the entire city council. And so, you know, you and I spoke earlier today, and I expressed some of that. And you know, it's a great reminder to all of us that the difficult times that our residents are having, whether it's individual residents or it's businesses. And I ask that all of us continue to take the most respectful interpretation of something. Oftentimes there's a really good reason why someone's doing something, and then they're really trying to put their best foot forward. And let's all continue to find and celebrate the creativity, the innovation, and the hardworking soul that this city has. And I think it's going to get us farther down the road that if we engage with even the idea of rants, right? Just that makes my heart hurt. And let's try to find the positive light in our city. So, but I really appreciate you stepping forward and owning what you own. So thank you for that.
Councilmember Rosa Pepe, did you raise your hand?
I did. Fred, thank you for your honest and heartfelt comments. It's greatly appreciated, and thank you for letting us know.
Councilmember Clausen?
Yeah, I would say the same thing that's already been said. Fred, thank you for your comments that you made. I think it's important that we all understand essentially what Beck has shared, that we are always looked at as a council member, a part of a team. And it's incredible, even though it might be a individual's personal views, it seems to be immediately wrapped up with the council or the city. So I appreciate what you said, and I appreciate, as you've indicated, this is kind of a learning experience, and I think it's a learning experience for all of us, kind of a reminder for all of us that, like Beck said, we've got to be sensitive and aware of our surroundings, and that we're always attributed to the council. So thank you.
I'm not going to read my message that I put out on Facebook today and our website, but you can find it on our website. And it was really a message of compassion and an understanding, and that reminding folks that our small businesses are in survival mode, and we need to be there to support them. And I think we all do. And this is just a good reminder. With that,
I just want to agree with all that has been said. Thanks, Fred. I know it's difficult to step up and own something like that, but it was also well done, and as a reminder to everybody. Thank you.
Did we have an executive session?
Not tonight.
Okay, just double checking.
Okay. Mr. Bond, thank you for being patient.
Yes, I just had one announcement. On the 14th of January, the city received what we thought was good news, because the governor issued an executive order delaying the implementation of the 2018 building codes. And so we removed that from the work study agenda and stopped working on it, thinking we had until June to finish. But alas, today he rescinded that order. And so now we have a January 31st deadline for the adoption of the 2018 building codes. We were working with South Kitsap Fire and Rescue on some pretty substantial revisions to our local amendments. Those will not be ready by next Monday, but I think what we're going to have to do is bring forward an ordinance that just changes the 2015 code to the 2018 code, and then do a second step that will amend, that will fix our local amendments further down the road so that we are consistent with state law. So next meeting, you will see a very brief ordinance adopting the 2018 building codes, and we will have a more comprehensive discussion later this spring once we can finish our work with the fire district.
And we're pretty close with the fire district, but there's 3 or 4 fairly meaty issues that we really need to dive into. So they've been great to work with on this project. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week.